And I must share that before I move on, but I had a talk that was specially crafted. I got the slides to the team. I got the outline to the Chinese brothers and sisters for their translation, and woke up this morning and just had one of those, that's not what I'm meant to be doing today. So I would like to do something very, very, very personal. So it's hard to give. And it's sort of, for me, it's holy ground and sacred space. So if you have an ancient text, in other words, the Bible, I'm going to read out a well-known passage from Luke 15. So you might like to follow on the screen above. Have we got that? Maybe so. Yep. So I'm going to start off with verse 11. Jesus continued that there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. I mean, a younger son in the first century would never do that. That was the height of disrespect and rudeness. Verse 13, not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of the hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." That's where I'll leave it. So I'll come back to that later on. The story there is about a prodigal son, and I have had a prodigal daughter. And so I have her permission to share what I'm about to share this morning. So please bear with me. So I've already shared here, by the way, for those who are visitors here, I'm sort of like an adjunct teacher here. I come several times in the year. I love it. I love coming back to you. So please pass that on to JD. I've already shared here that there was one time in our lives where Ruby and I, we took our 2 little kiddies. We had a 9-month-old and a 2-year-old daughter called Emily. And we went and lived in the slums of Manila. So for us, that meant living in the heart of what is called third world poverty. I mean, the country of the Philippines is a beautiful country. I mean, I don't know any Filipinos here. So talagang maganda ang bansa ninyo. So I'm just saying there that the country is very beautiful. But the slums are not. And no one should have to live in those places. But we went in his name out of compassion for the poor. And so we went and lived in a plywood shack with corrugated iron and so forth and so on. And that was our abode for nigh on 10 years. And as I said before, we took a 9-month-old and we took a 2-year-old, our eldest daughter at the time, Emily. And it must have been very hard for them. But I wasn't that aware of that. And then after 10 years, we came back and we thought we'd intentionally go and live in gangland in Lower Hutt in his name. We wanted to see what relative poverty was like in New Zealand. I come from more of an upper middle class family, so we went to gangland in Taita, and lived in this quirky house, and again, it was hard. And for the time that we were there, I was hurt and confused as a person. And I wasn't really that aware of what was happening with my eldest daughter, because by this time, she was about 11 or 12, and she was pulling her eyelashes out and her eyelids. But as I say, I wasn't that aware of that. And then after a couple of years there, I got a call to be a pastor of quite a well-known church in Australia, and we went over there. And so this is yet another shift. So we went over there, and then it became known to me about 7 months into my tenureship there that the lead elder was a practicing homosexual with a live-in partner. And when I made it known to the elders that I now knew, they said, well, what do you think? And I said to them, well, I don't know what to think, because I hadn't processed this complex issue around human sexuality. So I said to them, could you give me 3 months to really do the homework, the needed homework? And to cut a long story short, eventually I had to, sort of front with the whole church and declare where I had tentatively, provisionally got up to on this very complex issue. But I could see that this issue was beginning to divide the church. And I didn't want to divide a church. I didn't want that on my hands. So I graciously resigned, which meant another shift for the children. But I really wasn't aware of that. Now, prior to the shift, our eldest daughter had this dream. And in the dream of the night, she had a dream. And in the dream, the evil one was coming towards her to destroy her. And it was a God-given dream. It was a warning dream. That this evil one who seeks to disadvantage the already disadvantaged. Because by this time, our Emily, she was cutting. She was cutting her wrists and cutting her ankles, and she was cutting. But again, I wasn't really that aware of that. So we came back to New Zealand and came to Auckland here. And by this time, our eldest daughter, Emily, was 14. And she started going to Avondale High School, and she became a truant. And she would just, skip school, and she was starting to smoke and starting to drink here and have sex. And then the following year, she was doing hard drugs and hard spirits. And then when she got to the age of 16, I overheard a conversation between her and her brother, where she was trying to get her brother, my son, onto substances and drugs. And Ruby being my wife, Ruby and I felt that we had to sort of warn her that, this kind of behavior doesn't kind of fit under the family household, that we needed house rules for everybody's protection. Well, she got so upset at that she stormed out of the home and left home. Following year, she became a meth ice addict. In the following years, she joined the gangs of West Auckland, violent gangs, where at times she became the victim of domestic violence. And then by the time she was 23, she became pregnant. And we said to her, look, we'll reconfigure this house, we will rework it so that you can live here and the little one. But she didn't want it. So she went and had an abortion. And if someone has an abortion, it cuts their hearts to pieces, but it also afflicts the father heart. And then 2 years later, she had another abortion. And then she was at our place for dinner one night, and she said, oh, Dad, I want to go outside and have light up, have a cigarette. And so she went out onto the deck and I joined her. And as we were just conversing, I saw a black dot in the sky, in the horizon. I thought, I wonder what that is. And it seemed to get closer and closer, and it got closer, it got bigger. And then it started to hover above where we were. And I figured it was a police helicopter. And they had tracked her phone number because she was using and dealing with the gangs of West Auckland. And so she knew she had to get out of New Zealand. And so, like all good criminals, she went to Australia. And so I like Australia. So she went over there and she became a rough sleeper, a streetie. She continued to use hard drugs, take up with whoever, and that was her lifestyle. And then one day we get this phone call from Emily. And in the phone call, she says to me and Ruby, she says, I think I'm an addict. Because you can never tell an addict that they're an addict. They have to wait till they tell themselves. And so she said, I think I'm an addict. And we said, yeah. That's courageous, honey. Well done. And she said, I think I need to do rehab. And we said, that could be a good idea. And she said, the funny thing is, currently I'm working part-time in Crown Plaza, and every time I come out, I see this big billboard. And on the billboard, it's got transformation, for addicts, Jesus, that kind of thing. And she says to us on the phone, do you think I should go there? And we sort of say, yeah, that could be a good idea, So she goes there, and she's in there for about, 3 months, and then she gets kicked out. And she gets kicked out because she has begun again to take minor substances. But then she humbles herself, and she goes back in, and she has to start the program from day one again. And she does the entire 3 years. And while she was in there, she becomes a genuine disciple of Jesus Christ. That is awesome. And her life begins to change from the inside out and from the outside in. Internal and external things change for her. And she's so good with these ladies off the street and these addicts. And she's so good with them that when she had finished the program, they said to her, could you look after one of our households? And she said, yes. And as I say, she just had it. She just knew how to do it. I mean, she had the street smarts. And then they said, after a while, could you look after one of our campuses, manage it? She said, yeah, I'm in, let me do it. And she did that so well that eventually they made her general manager of the 7 campuses throughout Australia. And then she became this go-to person for media, print and media and magazine and you name it. One visit I was there and they found out that I was there and they said, could we come and talk to you because you're Emily's father, So it used to be she was my daughter, now I'm her father sort of thing. And so the TV crews turned up and, that's who she, and this is, and I wish I could stop there. But I can't stop there because that would be dishonest. So 4 years ago, Emily fell in love. And 3 weeks before the wedding, 3 weeks, she called it off. And the wedding was here in New Zealand, and we had people flying from the States, from Australia, from Vanuatu, and so on. And she called it off 3 weeks before the wedding because the bloke that she was going to marry had started to use minor substances. And Emily, the addict, she was still fragile. An addict is always an addict. It's just that some are clean. But she needed honesty. And he wasn't giving it. So she called it off. And it broke her heart. And then just last year, she fell in love again. And they became an item, and it was looking sweet as, you know. And then they called it off several months ago. And it just devastated her. Just absolutely broke her heart. And then about 3 months ago, so this is very recent, about 3 months ago, she and I were talking on the phone, and she was understandably in hurt and pain and humiliation and shame. And she just vented out on the phone. She just said, "Oh, men and fathers. Men and fathers." And then we awkwardly closed down the conversation. And I came away and thinking, men and fathers. What is that? And you know, sometimes you hear these things and it's so easy to kick them to touch, you know, to dismiss them. But I somehow knew I had to have a courageous conversation with myself. Because she said men and fathers. In other words, I had to ask myself whether in any way I was a contributing factor to her history. Did I in part have some responsibility for what happened to our Emily? So I began to reflect on me. And I remembered when I first became a disciple of Jesus Christ in Christchurch, that after a number of years, I had begun then to be a bit of a mouth, a bit of a speaker. And then the pastor of that church called me into his office and he said to me, "Mick, you know, for your public speaking, you know, I'll give you 7, 8 out of 10. But for your relational ability with people, I'll give you 0, nothing. You're dead useless," he said. And he was right. He was absolutely right. So I said to him, "What do we do about this?" And he said, "Oh, I know this Bible college in Australia where you go to do time, you know, and you need to be there. And you do 24/7, 365 with people. And you share a dorm with people. You get real close with people." And so I did it. And things began to move little by little in terms of my own personal development. And then as I was having this courageous conversation, I just didn't think about, you know, when I first became a disciple with that pastor, I didn't just think about this Bible college, but what next happened was I got married. And I began to reflect on me and Ruby. And Ruby and I, the first 20 years of our marriage were extremely difficult. We argued horrendously. 6 weeks into our marriage, she stormed out of the house and yelled for all the neighbors to hear that she had just made the biggest mistake in her life. And even, you know, if you don't mind me being a bit transparent here, you know, even in our sex life, when Ruby and I were being intimate, as I was having this courageous conversation with myself, I couldn't help but recall that, I don't know, I kept myself at arm's distance, as it were. I mean, you can do the act, but if there's no emotional cocooning occurring, and you know, Ruby, in those, she started to wonder, you know, whether I liked her. And of course, it wasn't a commentary on her. There was something about me. And at the time, I was blind to it. And so several months ago, when I was having this courageous conversation with myself, I began to sense something. I began to see something. And I thought, it's almost like I have this emotional attachment disorder that I struggle to attach. Even though I can be there, I can be there on holidays, we can go and do this, and we can go and do that, and I can be around and with people. But is it that I have this emotional attachment issue? So I thought the best people to consult are my children. So this is all in the last 3 months. So I got with each of my kids to acknowledge something that I had just seen and asked if they had experienced that which I had just acknowledged. And they all said yes. And I said, what was it like for you? And they said, very confusing. And more specifically with Emily, because I haven't got the permission, not that I just haven't asked the permission of the other two, but I have got Emily's permission to say the things that I'm saying. So when it came to Emily, when I said, so how did you experience this? She said, oh, Dad, she said, for years I wanted your gaze. For years I wanted your tenderness. For years I wanted your touch. For years I just wanted you to be fully emotionally present to me. And it just became such hard work, she said. I just got too tired of it, she said. So there was one time when she basically inwardly said to herself, well, stuff Dad, this is too hard. And so then she turned to other things. And so I have to say that yes, partly I am at fault. Not totally, but partly I am at fault. That I carry some responsibility for what Emily went through. And you're probably wondering, what has this got to do with the passage that I read out? Well, let me tell you about this passage. You see, there was a prodigal son, and I had a prodigal daughter. And the prodigal son in the story acted very dishonorably towards the father. And there are some aspects of Emily's story where, yes, she has acted dishonorably. And she freely admits all that. And then we're told in that story that the father made it a practice of his to, as it were, stand on the deck, stand outside, looking at the horizon, hoping against hope that he would see his dear son return. And then there was that day where the son, he could see the shadow in the horizon of a figure that was returning. And so what did the father do? The father rolled up his robes, which he didn't do in the 1st century AD. And the father ran. And why did the father run? Why did the father run? Because the father knew that in the 1st century AD, if a son had dishonored a respectful father, then as the son was returning to the son would return through the village. And the father knew in 1st century AD culture that the villagers would take it upon themselves to punish the returning son out of respect for the father. And the father, knowing this, what does he do? He runs. And he ran. And he wanted to get to the son first before others did damage to the son. And I have to declare this morning that for many, many years I did not run to my children. But I'm running now. I'm running now. I'm running. And it's hard. I mean, I turn 65 next year. It's doing some of this stuff in your senior years of your life. It's not easy. Where you make yourself incredibly vulnerable. But you know what I've discovered? That if you make yourself known more to others, you are loved more. And my 3 kids have been so good in their responses and in their maturity and in their just... So I'm running. So I have to ask a question this morning. Is there someone that you need to run to? I mean, are there people here and you need to run to a daughter? I mean, do some of you need to run to a parent? I mean, do you need to run to a grandmother, an uncle, an auntie? Do you need to run to someone in your workplace? Do you need to run to a sibling? Do you need to run to someone? I say run. I say run. Have that courageous conversation with yourself first. And then run. Return to that person. It's one of the best things you'll ever do in life. You run. Could I have the prayer team up here? Thanks. The prayer team. Could you come up now? People who pray for people? Yeah. Could I have everybody standing, please? You know, sometimes the first steps that can be made towards running can actually happen here. And if you've sensed that there's someone in your world that you need to run to, I mean, sometimes the best thing that can happen for you first off is for someone to pray for you. So if you have sensed something in the sharing this morning, and there is someone, and you can keep this person anonymous to yourself, but there's someone that you sense you need to run to, why not first walk up the front here and be prayed for? So could you start walking now? If you sense there's someone in your life, thank you. Just keep walking, and I'll ask the musicians to quietly play. But you just start walking to the front if there's someone that you need to walk and run towards. Please come now. Yeah, come out of your aisles and people will let you by. Start to, express that courage here. There are men here that do need to return to daughters. And there may even be someone here who needs to return to wife or husband. Maybe some here need, as a single person, you need to return to someone that you formed a soul tie with, but now it's no longer, and you just need to put things right. Maybe it's a grandfather or a grandmother. You start walking as we do this first song. Thank you.